Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to Family Talk, a production of the James Dobson Family Institute. I'm your host, Dr. James Dobson, and I want to devote our time today and tomorrow to a presentation from a great friend who recently gave a stirring speech about our nation and the challenges it's now facing. I'm referring to Bob McEwen, who is a former six-term congressman from Ohio. You've heard him a number of times on our radio program, and some of you have followed his career in politics in the public square for many years. Bob McEwen is deeply concerned about where America stands at this point in our history. I'm sure many of you are too. We're also concerned about the awesome implications for the upcoming presidential election. That's the theme of the powerful message you're about to hear. First, let me tell you a little bit more about Bob McEwen. When he was in Congress, he served as a special presidential envoy for Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush. He was also appointed as a U.S. representative to the European Parliament. Prior to his work in Congress, he was elected to the Ohio General Assembly. So he's been in politics most of his adult life. Bob currently serves as the executive director of the Council for National Policy, of which I'm also a member. Bob and his wife Liz have 4 children and 5 grandchildren, some of them recently born. With that, let's hear the first part of this recorded presentation from my friend, Congressman Bob McEwen. We've titled it, Preserving the History and Blessings of America.
Well, thank you, Tim, and thank the Collingsworth for opening their home to us tonight to be able to celebrate this occasion as we discuss one of the most important decisions that we'll ever make in just a few weeks ahead. You know, for thousands of years, people hoped to someday fly. But it was the Americans that invented the airplane, and the light bulb, and the telegraph, and the telephone, the global positioning system, put men on the moon. There's a ship in Hong Kong and Singapore at this moment that's using a global positioning system that's conceived, invented, and maintained by Americans. There's a plane flying over socialist Africa using a GPS system that Americans maintain. There's a car dealer in Buenos Aires for ordering a part from Stuttgart, Germany, using an internet that was conceived, invented, and maintained by Americans. There are skyscrapers all over the world. Why? Because an American by the name of Elisha Otis invented the safety elevator. And there are places where it's 100 and 120 degrees. Why? Because an American by the name of Willis Carrier, God love him, invented the air conditioner. No nation has blessed the world like this nation. Every year, more books, more plays, more symphonies, more copyrights, more inventions. 4% of Americans do more of that than the other 96% combined. And the question has to be, why? Also, they've created more wealth. 56 men got together and took a godly principle and decided to make a country that was free. And that little 4% has created more wealth than all recorded history combined. Now, the question would be why? The 6th largest nation on earth, the GDP, the gross domestic product, the goods and services created by that entire nation, is smaller than the GDP of Arkansas. 91 million Filipinos create less wealth every year than 3.5 million Oklahomans. 110 million Mexicans, with all their oil, create less wealth than the state of Illinois. This nation is abundantly, abundantly blessed. And the question would have to be why? And then there's the idea that this nation has blessed the world like no other nation. When a tsunami hits the 4th largest nation on earth, the largest Muslim nation, Indonesia, to whom do they turn for aid? The hearts and the billfolds of the compassionate people called Americans. The World Health Organization. Americans give as much money as the rest of the world combined. The list goes on and on and on. No nation has blessed the world like this nation has. And no nation has shared its wealth as greatly either. We're traveling in Africa, and we're way out in the place where the road stopped, and you had to walk down a path And then we had to cross a river on a trunk that a tree had laid across. We're out in the middle of nowhere. And little kids showed up with little plastic bottles. And we said, where are they going? He said, they're going to the fountain where the clean water is. And so we went there, and there, as these little kids would go get the water to take it back into the place where they lived, was a gift of the people of the United States of America. No nation has ever risked blood or treasure for the freedom of another and never asked anything in return. I served on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and as World War II has passed and the Korean veterans have come to the fore, I had the opportunity to address the parliament in South Korea, and I mentioned to them that in all of my encounters with Americans that bear in their body the burdens of the war in which they were engaged, and 50,000 Americans lost their lives for one purpose, not for America, but so those people could live freely. And now that little country that was third from the bottom in wealth when it got its freedom under America is now the 10th richest nation on earth. And I said, never have I heard a single soldier ever complain about the sacrifice that he made, not for himself or even his country, but for the freedom of others. There has never been a nation like this. So how did it start? Well, they got together, and it's right in the opening line of our birth certificate. It says this. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, which is kind of a Jeffersonian gracious way of saying, any idiot ought to understand this. You'd be blind, deaf, and dumb, and you ought to be able to understand that these truths are self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed, not by a 5-4 vote of the Supreme Court, not because are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what does government do? The very next sentence, to secure those rights, not to give them, not to achieve them, not to divide them, but to preserve the rights that God gave them. To preserve those rights, governments are instituted among men. The purpose of the United States government is, first of all, at every level, to preserve life. Notice the sequence, life, then liberty. See, liberty is a precious little value if you're dead. You have to have life first. And in America, is the only nation that preserved life, then liberty, then sewer systems and overpasses. But the first thing it did was life, so that a person, not because of their bloodline or how much property they own or all of these things that you hear people talking about, the qualifications for office was because of their gender or their race. No, just because God made them, they became Americans, and they knew that if they came here, a Jew could be chased from all over the world. If could just get under the canopy of protection of the American flag, they would be safe, that life would be preserved here. And that has allowed us to prosper as no one ever has. And so our rights don't come from a group. They don't come because of what union we belong to or our skin color or our gender. And that battle has been going on for quite some time. You'll still hear our opponents. They'll talk about women's rights. They'll talk about Hispanic rights. They'll talk about African American rights, blonde, left-handed rights. Rights don't come from the group. They come from God. Now, if they come from the group, we're in trouble. Our daughter was in Rwanda, where 80% of the people are Hutu and 20% are Tutsi. If rights come from the group, 80% can vote to kill the 20%, which they did. And over the course of 90 days with machetes, they killed 1 million people. In America, you can vote 95-5 to kill Jews. Can't do it. The rights don't come from the 95%. The rights come from God, and God protected life. And when you do it God's way, whether it be your life, your marriage, your community, or your country, God's way prospers. And so this group got together and decided they were going to do something that had never been done before. Prior to the Declaration of Independence, slavery had been ubiquitous. Now, some of our young people that have gone to these poor colleges where they have professors for diversity. That means they didn't grow up in America, and so they're going to be diverse. And so they come here, and they couldn't find Nebraska with a flashlight, but they teach people how of these various things, and they think that America invented slavery. It's exactly the opposite. Prior to that time, we understand the Jews knew that when they were in Egypt, anybody even watched the Ten Commandments should have known this. That is, that slavery was ubiquitous throughout all recorded history until one day, July 4th, 1776, 56 Americans said, no more from now on. Now, it's going to be a chore to get rid of it, but from that moment on, those people made slavery anathema. And so that's why we honor George Washington and Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and eventually Ulysses Grant and Abraham Lincoln that ended slavery for the whole world. And we honor those folks that did it. Well, America was about 25 years old, August 1815. And the country that was the strongest power on earth, Britain, it was in a fight, and it wanted to have some workers, some soldiers. And so what did you do if you wanted people? You just went out and you took them. And so the Muslims in North Africa, they'd go across the Mediterranean, and they'd take the folks in Southern Europe, and they would make them slaves. Now, they tried that with Americans one time, and this little country said, no, not us. And we commoned together 3 little ships, and that's the U.S. Navy, and we went over there to stop it. And when we landed, we were going to go in and rescue the Americans, and we did, and we know what those people like to do. They like to cut people's heads off. And so they took the straps off of the ship, and they wrapped them around their neck. And to this day, U.S. Marines are called leathernecks because in their first battle to rescue the Americans, which they did, they were able to not only use leather, but also to stand for freedom. Well, a few years later, American ships are going across the ocean, and the enemy, which was in a battle with France, said, we'd like to have those sailors. And so they would come and they would enslave or impress the American sailors. And little old America, with its little orneriness of just fearing God and loving freedom, said, you can't do that to us. And so they declared war. And the strongest military in the world came, and the last president to command troops in the field was a fellow by the name of James Madison. He was the president of the United States, and his wife, who was the first lady to be called the first lady, was fixing lunch for a command luncheon. And lo and behold, as they were about ready to sit down to eat, a messenger came running in and said, President Madison is not coming to lunch, but the enemy is. And with that, they grabbed a painting of George Washington off the wall and grabbed a tea set from John Adams and ran out the front door. And as they left, the enemy entered the back door, came in and ate the lunch, went out, sat in the yard of the White House until it got dark, and then put lighted arrows through the windows and burned the entire city of Washington to the ground, until there's only the 4 stone walls of the Capitol and the 4 stone walls of the once White House at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Now, having wiped out the government, all our records are gone. They've burned the Library of Congress. We have nothing left. They then did the next thing, that is, they have to wipe out the military, which was assembled in Baltimore, the 4th largest city and the 2nd largest seaport. And so as they began to march 40 miles to Baltimore, they went through a little town of Upper Marlboro. And there are Americans. And Americans don't like to be mistreated, and so they come out and they heckled them when they're going by. You miserable people coming out here picking on us. And so to get even, they stole their doctor, a fellow by the name of Dr. Bean. And they just took him with them because military always needs a medic. And so they went off, and now they lost their doctor, so they were upset, and they went to his friend, who was Francis Scott Key, who was a lawyer. He said, we want you to get our doctor back. Well, he can't negotiate with the foreign enemy, so he went to the president and said, well, you need an official. Here's Colonel Skinner. He'll go with you. Go see what you can do. So they went to Baltimore. They rowed out to the Tonnant, the command ship of the British fleet, and he said, we want to have him back. And while they're arguing during the day, Colonel Skinner went around to the various soldiers and said, did Dr. Bean treat you? And they all hand-wrote appreciation for the way they'd been treated by the Americans when they were here. At the end of the day, they dumped all the letters on the commander's desk and said, we want to be free. And he said, I don't care, you can go. So the fact is, your country's gone. We're going to get rid of the military tonight. The United States won't exist tomorrow morning, so I don't care what you do, but you're not going any place tonight. You're going to watch us. We're going to take over the military. We're going to collapse this thing, and then we're going home, and I don't care about you. And so as the dawn came up the next day at 7 o'clock, they began the bombardment of the fort that protected the fleet in Baltimore, Fort McHenry. And the commander was a fellow by the name of George Armistead. He was a fellow in his 30s, and he said he knew that if they were going to take his country, they'd have to come through him. And so a year before, he'd gone out and found Mary Pinkerskill, who was a maker of colors, and he asked her to make a flag, a banner large enough for them to see. There were 15 states, and so there were 15 stripes, each one 2 feet. That's 30 feet high, 42 feet long. Each star was 2 feet in width. And he folded it up, waiting for the time that he'd be under attack, that they would know exactly where he stood. And so, as the battle went, over 1,500 shells during the day, they had a new one invented by a Mr. Congreve, who had a timer on it that were supposed to land and explode, but sometimes the timers weren't so good, and they went off and you could see it, and it went on all day long, and then all night long, and all they wondered was, as long as that flag is there, that means America is still alive. But at 1 o'clock, everything went deathly silent. Well, they wondered what had become of their country. And what happens is, everybody knows that in the military, to get there, you have to have a navy. And to land, you need the Marines to break the way. And we used to have cannon for artillery. Now we use the Air Force. But in every military operation, there comes a time when you have to put one foot in front of the other. And that's what the Army does. And so at 1 o'clock, when everything went quiet, they didn't know what was happening. But here's what had happened. These Americans, not Army, Navy, Marine, just God-fearing, freedom-loving American men, had taken 22 of their own ships and sunk them in the entrance to the harbor to protect their homes. So they knew that if they were to get to them, they'd have to come over here through the swamp. And so they then, these fathers, these men, these Americans, these freedom lovers, went out and laid in the weeds waiting for them to proceed. And when they did, they welcomed them boldly. To the point that by 5 o'clock, the commander demanded a retreat because they had been defeated. And poor Dr. Bean and Colonel Skinner and Francis Scott Key didn't know what had happened, and they wrote those words, "Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we had hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars o'er the ramparts were so gallantly streaming? And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?" He doesn't know if he has a country. But then as the sun came up and he saw it still waving, and they rode into Baltimore to go to the Indian Queen Hotel, where he wrote 3 additional verses, the last one being this, thinking about those of us here. "Oh, thus be it ever, that free men shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation. Blessed with victory and peace, may this heaven-rescued land praise the power that has made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause it is just. Let this be our motto: in God is our trust. And the star-spangled banner in triumph will wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave." I've listened to people all across Europe tell the stories of when they were children, and the American soldiers were going through, and their father would make them travel or hide under an overpass or to ride in the car at night, and he would always check to see where the American flags were, because they knew that when the Iron Curtain fell and the socialists took over and the pain and poverty and death that would come, if they were with the American flag, they knew that they would be safe. And they were. A Jew knows that if he could just get to a ship that had an American flag, a building with an American flag, they knew that wherever the American flag was, that there would be peace, there'd be freedom, there'd be opportunity. And now we have those among us who, when our anthem, our star-spangled banner is played and the flag is flown, rather than standing, we're the ones that invented baseball. We invented football. We invented basketball. The entire world watches. And how do we feel about our freedom? We have these multimillionaire folks that bow down on their knees as though in slavery, put their nose in the grass instead of standing as Americans should. And that's what is at risk for each one of us. We have to decide whether or not we're going to have these pathetic anti-American freedom haters, those that want to take innocent life, those that care not about liberty, those that want to tell us how we can worship and win and if we can. But let me just tell you this. Those pathetic multi-millionaires on their knees with their nose in the grass, they weren't the source of America's strength in the first place. God blessed America. And when we focus on Him, He will continue to bless us, and the decision will be ours to make. Will we follow man's way, or will we follow God's way, as our founders did, and He blessed it, or will we seek another one in which we turn our backs on those that fought for liberty and for freedom? Jesus told the story. It's called the parable of the talents. And it seems that the master was leaving, and so he gave a talent, which is a certain sum of money. He gave 5 talents to one of his servants, and he gave 2 to another, and he gave 1 to another. And when he returned, the one that had done 5 had invested. He was an entrepreneur, and he'd been faithful, and he gave him back 10. The one that had been given 2, the same story, and he gave him back 4. But the one that had 1 talent, he decided that he wasn't going to do anything with it. And so he came to the master and handed him back what he had given to him. And Jesus, in telling the story, is not impressed. In fact, he said, the one which had received 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew that thou art a hard man, and I was afraid and went and hid my talent in the earth. And the response was, thou wicked and slothful servant. Take therefore the talent from him and give it to the one that has 10, and cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness, where there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. He was not happy. Well, the fact is that I've had the privilege of speaking at presidential prayer breakfasts around the globe. And whenever those people pray for the benefit of their country, they be the diplomatic corps or the parliamentarians or the ministers, they always spend almost as much time as they spend on their own country praying for the leadership of the United States of America. Now, why? Because they know that their safety is dependent upon the leadership that you and I choose. They chant every Friday in Iran, death to America, death to America. Why? They don't care about America, but they hate Israel. And they know, the scripture says if you want to take a city, you must bind the strong man. There's only one strong man in the world. It's the United States of America. As I said, when a ship is attacked on the high seas, this happened over 300 times last year, to whom can they appeal? The 327,000 Americans that wear the uniform of the United States Navy. The United States is the standard for righteousness in the world. If a nation wants to cheat another nation and print artificial bills, it's the American banking system that puts a stop to it. That's who they appeal to. Just as I said, the British trawler, and once the great rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves, the greatest navy in the history of mankind. When their ship was attacked in the Persian Gulf a few months ago, they had to appeal to America to come to their defense. And everyone knows that if you can just take down America, it's the standard for righteousness in the banking business, in copyrights, and in patents, and in transportation. And that means that there is a certain significant responsibility upon us. Not only because we are good and do good, but we also stand for what is right.
Well, this is James Dobson again, and you've been listening to a message given by Bob McEwen, my great friend, a former congressman, who is a patriot. I think you can feel that. He loves this great nation, and with all of us, he is praying that men and women of faith will go to the polls to preserve the liberty that was purchased for us by the blood of our ancestors. We're going to let you hear the balance of this stirring speech tomorrow on Family Talk, and I hope that you'll be with us.
This has been a presentation of the Dr. James Dobson Family Institute.
Hello, everyone. Roger Marsh here for Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk. The news comes in all shapes, sizes, and formats these days, but how do you cut through all the noise and get to the heart of the matters that affect your family? Well, come to Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk and sign up for Dr. Dobson's monthly newsletter. You'll find clarity on tough issues, encouragement for daily life, and trusted principles to help you build strong, healthy, and connected families. Go to drjamesdobson.org and sign up today. That's drjamesdobson.org.
Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Tim Clinton, Executive Director of the James Dobson Family Institute and President of the American Association of Christian Counselors. I wanted to take a moment to let you know that we here at the James Dobson Family Institute love you, and we're praying for you. If you're struggling and need some encouragement, we'd be honored to pray with you. You can call us toll-free at 877-732-6825. Or simply go to drjamesdobson.org.